Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, folks. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio on August 13th, 2014. I am your host, Andrew Fisher, exposing the true and false nature of reality for what it is and what it isn't every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. We're only going to go to 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight, and then we're going to try to get my guest tonight, Frater X, on for an additional hour sometime before my next planned show next Wednesday. So hopefully we may be able to do that tomorrow from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, hopefully. So it's going to be an hour tonight. So I'm going to have to do the news on the fly here. But just mention Frater X. He is someone who has seen a lot because of his experiences within the Illuminati. And let me make it clear, he had no idea that he was working for bad guys. Almost nobody in orders like the Rosicrucians, Knights Templar, and Freemasons, they don't know what's going on in the ladder of authority above them. There's so much compartmentalization, it's ridiculous. But first, we're going to have to do the news first, courtesy of Alex Jones and Company at InfoWars. I will do this on the fly just to make sure that Frater X can get on in 5 minutes after the hour. All right, first article, photos. Ferguson police train weapons, laser sights on peaceful protesters. Police use show of force to intimidate demonstrators. Yes, police state, harass everybody even when they're exercising their rights. It's absurd. Act like you understand that you took an oath to defend the Constitution, cops, and don't act like you don't, okay? Next article. Facebook increasingly censors InfoWars alternative media. Multiple users of the social media site unable to share videos by InfoWars and others. I am, of course, on a crusade, as I mentioned before, to spread that video on the Alex Jones channel called Secrets Police Don't Want You to Know, where Rule of Law radio show host Eddie Craig gives that presentation that holds the key to keeping billions in stolen revenue out of the hands of the corrupt cops and tyrants in government and the New World Order. And, well, people just got to use the information in that video to their advantage. It's 2.5 hours long, but trust me, it's totally worth your time. I put that like crazy on Facebook pages, and I wonder if they're going to try to censor me because I do that, because that is on the Alex Jones channel, YouTube channel. But anyway, next article, Snowden. NSA took down Syria's internet, targeted China. NSA recently provided Israel with intel to target Palestinians. Yeah, the NSA is spying on the whole world. Big surprise. And by the way, NSA targeted China. China targeted America. Everybody is spying on everybody, folks. The NSA is just the cream of the crop when it comes to government agencies that do surveillance. Our next article, does this video prove Robin Williams was on Prozac? Clear connection between SSRI, drugs, and suicide ignored once again by establishment media. Okay, I don't know if this is another Michael Jackson thing where a celebrity who wanted to expose the New World Order agenda was killed, and they did a cover story about his death to conceal the fact that he was killed. That's why Michael Jackson was killed. He wanted to be a whistleblower celebrity. I haven't seen anything that would suggest that was the case with Robin Williams, but apparently he was suffering from some sort of depression, so maybe that might explain why he committed suicide. Very funny guy. We're going to miss him. Next article. InfoWars now accepts Bitcoin. Oh, that's good to know. Well, I don't know. Some people say Bitcoin is really much ado about nothing. We shouldn't jump on the craze. But, hey, it's an alternative currency. Maybe it's not such a bad idea. Good job, InfoWars. Next article. Snowden. There's a holy shit smoking gun revelation coming. Whistleblower says government believes he has information that would be the death of them all politically. I wonder what that could be. Well, first of all, as I said, the NSA is spying on the whole world and is the cream of the crop among government agencies that do the spying. So what could Snowden be releasing? Could it be the fact that the NSA can use technology like the Gwen Towers to track people using the unique emissions of light that each human, just like every human has its own unique fingerprint, so too does every human have its unique electromagnetic aura. Well, some say aura is not the right term here, but aura from its body, and the NSA can use that to track you. Or maybe the NSA has bases on the moon. Could that be what Snowden is going to release? Or could it be that the people at the top of the NSA ladder of authority are gray aliens from Orion? Could that be what Snowden is going to release? Well, folks, that's what some other sources I've listened to say. Does Snowden have that info? Who knows? I don't know. But we know the NSA is spying on the whole world. All right, two more articles here. Member of Parliament claims Ebola virus has arrived in France. Patrick Balcony issues emergency alert. Well, yeah, because of what happened in America with those people being shifted into this country after Obama signs an executive order saying anybody with respiratory problems can be detained by government shortly before that person with Ebola was brought into the country, and now someone says it's arrived in France. Are they trying to get us sick to put us in FEMA camps? Who knows? I don't know. Next article. Establishment media moves to debunk ISIS CIA asset story. Story posted by Infowars.com dismissed as Snowden hoax. I don't have time to get into this, but we know that ISIS is Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda is part of the CIA and is run by the CIA and funded by the United States government. and British intelligence and Saudi intelligence to a great extent too, and Israeli intelligence, of course, the Mossad. That's the Rothschilds for you. All right, but anyway, let's see. Apparently Freeman hasn't called in yet. Let me tell him to call. All right, that might be him right now. Area code 785. Is this Frater X?
Yeah, how's it going, Andrew?
Glad to see you, even though we can only go for an hour, so we might as well get this started so we can get this going. By the way, do you of any other day? I can do this tomorrow up until next Tuesday from 7 p.m. Eastern to finish this full, what's supposed to be 2-hour show. Is any day available? Let me know now so I can schedule that after the show ends.
Yeah, we could probably do it again tomorrow night. Tomorrow,
from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern?
So it'd be 6 p.m. my time.
No, 6 p.m. my time. I'm in the Eastern time zone. You're in the Central time zone, right?
Yeah, so I thought you
Okay.
said 7 p.m. Eastern. So you said 6 p.m. Eastern?
Yeah, that's when it would start. It would end at 7 p.m. Eastern. So can we do that tomorrow?
Sure. So it'll be 5 to 6 my time.
Yes. Yeah, so, all right. I will schedule that. Well, actually, I'll schedule that sometime before midnight tonight. I want to do something as soon as this show ends out in nature. Sun gazing, that is. But it's one advantage of doing this show for an hour. I get to sun gaze afterward. But I do want to be fair and give you another hour, just like I do all my guests. I give them 2 hours. But we might as well get this started because your phone may actually die before the hour's up. So you have seen a lot of experience within the Illuminati because you have family that go back a long time in regards to the British Isles history. It's like, I believe, back to the 1500s, I seem to recall reading somewhere. I think it was on the Free Your Mind conference website because you presented at that conference. And you were in many different orders, and I'm sure you were compartmentalized, and you had no idea that the people at the top of the ladder of authority were actually people who want a global totalitarian government and all. But that makes you an excellent primary source, and I said I wanted to give you the floor, and I do, because I love people who are primary sources and can tell their experience, especially when it comes to things like this. So tell us about your family history, why that's important to know, and what's also important about how you were part of different orders, the Masonic Order, and I believe it said Knights Templar, Knights of Malta, Rosicrucians, and Druids, I think, was something that said in the description I read about you. So you got the floor about that. I'll give you 35, 40 minutes to talk about that, and maybe I'll finish the show with a couple questions or something. So tell us about that. You got the floor for about 40 minutes.
Okay, Andrew. Well, thanks for having me on. So the show is called The Nature of Reality, right? That's the name of the show?
Nature of Reality Radio.
Nature of Reality Radio. So that's a really perfect topic because, basically for myself, I was a philosophy major in college. So the nature of reality has always been a big question for me. And, I delved into Eastern mysticism because I felt like, being a Westerner, that I was raised Catholic, and my experiences with Catholicism left me with a certain sense of deadening as far as mysticism goes. I really felt like I wasn't in touch with Western tradition, really, and so I went to the Easterns. And what I learned, though, in college was that there was this rich Western tradition that was sort of ghettoized, sort of undercurrent per se, carrying through the Dark Ages, And so I made it my mission to kind of figure out what was going on there. And one of the things that happened simultaneously was the man who had raised me, my stepfather, joined the local Blue Lodge in my hometown in New England on the east coast of right here in the U.S. of A. And so I grew up in a little New England white picket fence kind of town, with little white church steeples and little villages, and people all know each other, and they're all related and stuff like that, And there was all these little empty, Blue Lodge buildings, the AF and AM lodge buildings that were usually emptied and looked abandoned, except for once or twice a month. You'd see a whole bunch of cars show up at around dinner time, and there'd be a buzz with activity, and we always kind of wondered what was going on there. And as a kid, we used the parking lots for our skateboards and bikes, to ride around on the ramps and stuff, and it just seemed like a vacant building to us. But so my stepfather joined the lodge, and it really got me curious because I knew him to be a pretty good man, and yet I had already, this is the mid-'90s, so I had already kind of experienced, the undertow of the pop culture, quote-unquote, conspiracy theories with regards to Freemasonry and the Knights Templar and the secret societies and the Bavarian Illuminati and all this stuff. So I was really interested in exploring deeper. And then at the same time, I found out, I did some research into my own family history on my mother's side and found that I could trace my family back through ancient Scotland to ancient Ireland, to 9th century Ireland. So from 9th century Ireland to about 1245 in Scotland, my family settled on the western banks of Loch Lomond in Scotland and started basically for generations being involved in various orders of chivalry and fraternal initiatory type orders. There was a couple of memberships in the Order of the Grail, something called the Order of the Grail in the 15th century. Not even sure what that was at that time, because that doesn't really it's not in the usual roles, as it were. But so basically, this just turned into an obsession for me. I had to know more about these orders, and the more I uncovered, I'm sure your listeners have gone down these rabbit holes themselves, the different authors out there that sort of open one up to all that there is to tell about the lore surrounding Freemasonry in America, Freemasonry in Europe, and the British Isles, like you mentioned at the beginning. And so for me, it was just a matter of trying to kind of almost reverse engineer the history and look at our present climate and the way we see things as they are, as my personal experience in America, growing up in public schooling and private schooling, and then where we've come from as a society from the time of, say, 240-odd years ago, revolutionary times, until now. And that's where I focused a lot of my work, Andrew, was just to stay with the time period between the revolution and to now in America, because I don't know a lot about other countries. I haven't traveled around a lot. I've only spent all my life in America. I can tell you a lot about America. I've traveled all around and studied a lot. And so what I found is that, yes, in fact, that there is evidence that, and I've just finished a book called The Secret War Inside Freemasonry, which will be coming out probably around Thanksgiving, from Sync Book Press. I've just turned the manuscript over to the editorial staff, so we're moving forward. And in this book, I basically map out, trace a timeline, if you will, establish a timeline for the entry of Freemasonry into the colonies of North America and all the Americas, as it were, and then how it basically infiltrated the early American government, and then especially the American government that survived the Civil War, because that's a key point in our history, because I would identify that point as the basic birthing of the military-industrial complex in America as we know it today, because at the end of the Civil War, you had the moneyed interest, the railroad barons, the military, and the government all working closely together to establish the American empire as we know it, with boots on the ground in 150-odd countries out of 190 in the UN, just clearly a military empire. But so the nature of reality, back to that point, what I've discovered in my research is that we are living, in fact, in a time which basically is the wake of, or the aftermath of, a species-wide hijacking of consciousness that some 10, maybe 13,000 years ago, give or take a millennium, one or more earth-shattering event horizon catastrophes basically knocked humanity's collective network of consciousness, along with every individual consciousness, offline, creating, in effect, a species-wide post-traumatic stress disorder. And in this weakened mental and emotional state, I think that the human species was ripe for exploitation. And, in keeping with the idea of a cataclysm, just think for a second, in the wake of a catastrophe like a flood, for example, or earthquake, or anything that just destroyed the whole society around you, I'd say probably some of the most important people, aside from medical personnel, would be people who could build builders, architecture. That would be a key thing. And in fact, we find that the early esoteric occult schools and orders, that these fraternal orders that patterned throughout the Western civilization, I would call, I would say, just to mark a period of human history, you see builders and architectural concepts and working tools around building being focused on for these schools of these secret schools of higher thought, if you will, and the ones that contain the knowledge of time immemorial, the knowledge of before the time, the old knowledge, if you will. So moving forward from that time period, basically humanity being brought back online, as it were, in a veritable safe mode, like when a computer crashes, so that the collective disordered awareness, it's sort of a limited, like when in safe mode, you have your applications and your platforms are only on the basic operating system. You're not going to run a lot of extra stuff because you're in safe mode, So our awareness in the same way, we have this narrow bandwidth of potentiality and awareness where it's just this we were told in our upbringing that 90% of our brain is not being used, and so much majority of the DNA is quote unquote junk DNA, and this to me is evidence of a shutting down of consciousness, or a narrowing, bottlenecking of the signal to just keep everybody on a basic, fear-based paradigm of awareness. And the authority for this new existence was justified by one select priesthood after another, chosen for their obedience and skill in perpetuating the ruling paradigm that was continually reinforced by bloodlines. So you have priesthoods and bloodlines working together. And you can also, I think, at this point we could take a moment and talk about how basically out of the steps of ancient Iran, out of Persia, arose two basic schools of esoteric knowledge dealing with these universal laws of consciousness, which basically are at the root of the nature of reality, because all reality is how we perceive it. So how we perceive things is how reality is, in fact, constructed. And so these two schools that I speak of employed the knowledge of manipulating awareness and consciousness, and they within mystery traditions. Now, one school would be called, today we might call them the Illuminators. So they commenced to instruct and liberate those who initiated the path of wisdom, while the other school we could call the Illuminati, for lack of better terms. They didn't call themselves that, but we would identify them as that now. And that was because they entrapped and enslaved their followers. So the Illuminators were fosters, as in phosphorus, light guides to divine wisdom and truth. And their tools and techniques guided their initiates to full integration and self-actualization. Whereas the Illuminati, on the other hand, then these are the dark magi, employing many of the same techniques as the Illuminators. They bound their adherents to false realities and dead-end rabbit hole simulated chaos. So, as we've already established, how we perceive reality is the basis of how, it's how we view it. And communication plays a pivotal role in constructing and maintaining how we experience the world around us, a world defined by a particular map of reality, a particular way of looking at the universe. And human-to-human experience thus has a really potential influence on the way people understand themselves and the world around them, no matter how they define it. And so these different orders that rose up, it's important to understand that these secret schools and religious orders originally were formed to preserve and transmit universal knowledge with the shifting ebb and flow of consciousness through human history. These orders were supposed to protect that knowledge from being misused and exploited, though more often than not, as we've seen, they simply kept the knowledge from the masses in order that the current social elite might control them. And today, we also see that in other places where the knowledge was made readily available to anyone, the unrestrained science and technologies today are evidence of the damage that knowledge without ethics and integration of some sort of integration of consciousness as a moral compass. Without that, this is the kind of damage that can be caused by unrestrained science and technology. So down through history, these orders evolved into various modifications and incarnations of those two ancient schools, sort of like Star Wars, the light and the dark side. And with the union of the underground Hermetic schools in the British Isles and the stonemason lodge left over from the Roman Commercine guilds in the 16th century, a new form of Protestant mysticism for Renaissance man was born in those same British Isles, one which provided individual access to the divine through elaborate rites and rituals, with this alternative to Jesuit papal-controlled holy orders. In this way, an individual could interact with the divine without the church's intercession. And this is key, and you can see why this will be a problem for the church leaders, right? So this is where we move into talking about secrecy as a tool and as a technique. Secrecy began as a way of surviving church persecution to avoid being called a heretic, from the Greek heresis, which means to choose, as in choosing an alternate view to the Catholic or universal church views. So needless to say, the church, who's set moral policy for the masses, took great exception to any form of mysticism outside of their holy orders. And, for a moment, Andrew, we should talk about mysticism, because I'm not sure the demographic of your listeners, but I can tell you that oftentimes people hear certain words and they have a preconceived notion and a prejudice around these words. And so, mysticism gets a bad rap in our society because people discount it or they demonize it. So it's the two Ds, discounting or demonizing. But either way, it's a misunderstanding, because the way I perceive it, mysticism, though it can be employed in the negative to mean to trick or to fool, as in to mystify, this is not the only working definition. And with all definitions, as a matter of fact, especially with things esoteric being hidden, things that are not revealed. Exoteric is the outer, esoteric is the inner. So ESO, as in EXO and ESO. So esoteric, there are numerous meanings veiled within each symbol or emblem or word or whatever is being revealed within a ritual or a teaching or a ceremony or a lecture. There's always another meaning that's revealed and revealed. So usually it's revealed only with progression through the degrees. Another definition of mysticism is a belief that union with or absorption into the deity or the absolute, whatever your definition of that is, or the spiritual apprehension of knowledge inaccessible to the everyday intellect may be attained through contemplation and surrender of self. This is the definition of mysticism that I find is more work. It works for me. It's a more working definition. And, we find that many spiritual practices and systems of development employ these different techniques of contracting subjective awareness to increase objectivity, which is really at the root of mysticism. So think about it. You are a subjective awareness. So the idea of contracting, of shrinking that subjective awareness in order to expand and increase objectivity. So you're placed within the whole, the one. And schools of mysticism offer useful tools and skillful devices to process all kinds of a variety of disorders, too. So people who have trouble with, have experienced trauma or high anxieties, as well as inspiring art and creativity. So these are all parts of schools of mysticism. And I believe, by the way, that these are essential to social protest through noncompliance. It's artistic expression. That's just my personal belief. So secrecy was employed by initiatory fraternal orders to expose, this is another tool of secrecy being used, to expose imposters to the craft, seeking the benefits afforded active membership in a lodge through one of the most well-known apparatus of secret societies, the cloak and dagger passwords, grips, and signs of recognition. Now, these security devices were originally intended to weed out potential transient freeloaders posing as traveling brothers, as many lodges offered financial and social benefits well worth having, especially in colonial America, where lodges eventually opened their doors to a wider class of society. Such benefits often helped sustain a colonial brother Mason and even whole communities, which kind of like started the ball rolling for the whole charitable aspects and endeavors of Masonic orders especially, but all fraternities in general. But aside from these other uses that we've talked about, secrecy is also a vital technique for shifting consciousness from the normal everyday reality to greater states of awareness with many useful applications. So this is important only in contrasting how we have, remember, these two schools we talked about, a light and dark side. So on one side, you have a light side where people are actually being guided towards their full potential and self-actualization and integration. And it's all useful and it's all, growth-oriented. But on the dark side, with the Sith lords, if you will, you have and it's, I'm joking, but it's not a joke because I really believe that what's happened is whole elaborate systems have been created to counterfeit reality and to basically entrap people. And within the lodge systems especially, we find this going on. We find various side orders. There's literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of side orders that are basically like pilot fish on the body proper of Freemasonry in America and around the world as well, but especially, again, I focus on Freemasonry in America. So Freemasonry is basically the clearinghouse. You become a member of a lodge, you go through the first 3 degrees, the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and then the master mason degree. And at that point, you're made a member of the lodge. When you become a master mason, when you're raised to the sublime degree of master mason, the 3rd degree, you are now eligible for membership in these appendant, concordant orders, many of which you don't even know exist until they tap you to join. These are orders like Skull and Bones, for example, or other orders of such that, and some of the ones that were mentioned in the beginning of the introduction, the orders that I belong to, like the Order of the Sword of Bunker Hill, the Ancient Order of Druids. The Ancient Order of Druids no longer requires a man to be a Master Mason. As a matter of fact, men or women can join the Ancient Order of Druids. It's at aoda.org. But used to be that you had to be a Mason. That was originally a requirement to become a member. And a lot of these other side orders, that's the requirement. So one of them is one that many people know of called the Scottish Rite, Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite. And this order is especially interesting and one that really requires closer scrutiny. And once we look at it closely, we know if we watch any television show ever broadcast in the last, I'd say, 10 years at least, but probably longer, the Mason, quote-unquote, Mason expert, Masonic expert or Masonic member that is invariably interviewed in these shows, invariably debriefed, invariably turned to for their expert opinion, is always a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Supreme Council. 33rd degree Supreme Council. This is the key point here, because the 33rd degree is the highest level of the Scottish Rite, but it is not, in fact, the highest level of Freemasonry. And this is a very common misconception among people. And this is something that I address to great length within my book, The Secret War Inside Freemasonry. Again, go to thesyncbook.com. That's SYNC book.com to check out more information about that, and also the podcast that I do weekly with my wife, Frater X, called The Middle Chamber, which is on, we release a new podcast every Saturday night. But one of the things that we discuss, or that I discuss in the book, The Secret War Inside Freemasonry, extensively, is this charade, a charade being perpetrated by the Scottish Rite over the rest of the world, basically. They've convinced the world that they are Freemasonry, that they speak for Freemasonry, and that they, in fact, everything, they are the highest level of Freemasonry. they are the quote-unquote high degrees of Freemasonry. And that's just not true. This is a tradition that is observed. But true to form, the Scottish Rite was never more than a novelty order, a series of basically what we used to call orphan degrees that had no home, that floated around the continental states of Europe for decades until they were all kind of corralled under one umbrella or banner, and the banner that they were given would be the name of the order. And in this case, the first 25 degrees of what was called at one point the Ancient and Accepted Rite, or the Ineffable Degrees, evolved into the Scottish Rite. And then it evolved into 33 degrees after it was basically modified by certain individuals who got their hands on. As a matter of fact, several key individuals have seen worthy or seen themselves worthy to modify and change, basically, the system of degrees in the Scottish Rite and the government, the system of government around the Scottish Rite to meet their own personal agendas. And that's, again, something I address throughout the book. And what's of very particular interest is the fact that right before the Civil War, we have several key government administrative cabinet positions of the president and various members of Congress that were, in fact, 33rd degree Scottish Rite Supreme Council. And these individuals, people like Caleb Cushing or John Mitchell in the Civil War, they made decisive moves that really ended up voting in favor of the Confederacy. It was a couple of situations where weapons and armaments were sent to unfinished forts on the borders of states with the Confederacy, only to be then swooped up by Confederate soldiers who would move in and confiscate the supplies that were being left at unfinished forts, almost as if the Northern government was actually arming the South before the Civil War. And we know that Fort Sumter, which was the first shot to the Civil War, was in eye and earshot of the House of the Temple of Supreme Council in Charleston. And so that's another very important factor, as well as the fact that the Democratic National Convention of 1860 was held in Charleston, and all those same key 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemasons were involved. And another thing to keep in mind is the notorious Albert Pike and his involvement with the Scottish Rite, number one, but also with several other international orders, fraternal, esoteric, initiatory orders. One of them was a fraternity called the Young Americans Lodge, which was founded, according to Nicholas Hadjar from The Secret Founding of America. He says that the Young American Lodges were founded by Giuseppe Mazzini, who was the leader of the Italian Illuminati. They basically inherited the mantle from the Bavarian squad, if you will. And, as it changed hands, I think it became more than it ever really was to begin with, because my research into the Illuminati basically tells me that there was almost like a college fraternity, really, that Adam Weishaupt was a very young professor and all of his associates involved. These guys were all in their, early 20s. So these were college kids who were idealists, who came together and formed an order that they surrounded around this concept of the perfectibilists, the perfect ones, and it's an interesting connection linguistically from that, the perfectibilists, to the Lodge of Perfection, or the Rite of Perfection, which is in the Scottish Rite. So it's just a little bit of an aside there. But back to the point about reality and how secrecy plays a role in shifting consciousness. Now, in everyday reality, we live in the midst of an extraordinary and complex worldwide web of communication. And I'm not just talking about the Internet here. This web we live in reinforces specific ways of thinking about everything. And these things that we think are highly susceptible to suggestion in the form of propaganda, mass consciousness, manipulation, and misdirection. And, of course, the stronger and more consistent the messages within this web, the more difficult that it is to step outside of a particular map of the world to understand that the world can, in fact, be seen in completely different ways. This web effect can create a deadening uniformity of thought. And my goal, and I think many people's goals, is finding ways to break out of this web of uniformity. And one of the obvious approaches to doing this is found in spiritual systems. Nearly all spiritual systems, in fact, provide a variety of methods for doing this, the simplest and most common being the solitary monastic path, of the path of the monk. But, of course, few people are really cut out for the total hermit lifestyle, removed from all forms of human information exchange with all the subtle processes of verbal and nonverbal communication at levels that are not always perceptible. Another path lies within the esoteric systems employed by secret societies, among other groups. Esoteric secrets, by their very nature, esoteric secrets, so secrets within esoteric groups, or occult secrets, if you will, deliberately kept. By their very nature, they create a gap in awareness by placing the specific items of information outside that everyday web of communication, so that these items do not become part of the map of reality that we share with the rest of society. The gap defined by the secret is open in the web, and as long as the secret is kept, the gap remains. A spiritual vacuum forms. Now, if the secret is something painful or destructive or is imposed by force rather than freely chosen, the breach in the web can lead to madness and destruction. But if secrecy is freely chosen and kept in this example, it can become a tool with remarkable powers and a wide range of constructive and healthy uses for reshaping awareness. Because remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to prepare the mind to receive greater ideas, higher ideals, higher notions, knowledge and wisdom that some, like myself, believe is literally encoded within the cosmos and available. And this is the same consciousness. The old Hermetic axiom is as above, so below. So it's almost like a hologram. If you slice off one piece, the entirety is contained within the singularity. The sum total is contained within the smallest part, the greater reality within the smallest part. And so I believe that this is one of the wonderful missions of our life, is to fully unlock that potential, to become as closely in relation to that in ourselves as we possibly can. And that is a way for us to basically cultivate a rich inner life, to experience a reality that is beyond a transcendent state, if you will. But that's my own personal belief. What we're talking about here are techniques. And so, as we've said, a secret forms a link between its keepers and the items of information not included in the web of everyday life. So a bridge forms, a space between worlds that can heighten experience. The heightening of it is on a quantum level, not every day sometimes, and that is more open, this quantum level, open and better prepared to perceive symbolic, emblematic, and allegorical communications and transmissions far beyond everyday perceptual experience. So secrecy thus serves as a potent method of self-discipline that transforms an individual's relationship with the experiential world. But this inner and more uncommon aspect of secrecy is what makes it useful as a delivery system, imperceptibly synchronized with consciousness. Now, not unlike, for example, the tarot card, 22 trumps of the tarot, the major arcana. Each card transmits ancient wisdom and traditions. Each card is encoded with a Hermetic teaching. So in that same way, this is the level of consciousness that we are speaking to. So it turns out that on this level that we might reach through preparing the mind or shifting the mind, this is what attracts people. This is what has drawn people throughout generations to come into contact with Hermetic teachings and occult sciences and the esoteric arts, the forbidden arts, if you will, the ways that have been demonized and tabooed by the church and by quote-unquote scientific authority, which recognizes no paranormal, or they're just some scientific authorities beginning to recognize it. And, of course, we know that quantum mechanics and quantum theory is finally coming around to the realization that quantum entanglement cannot be avoided. So But, this is all par for the course when we realize that the original ideas, the universal laws of consciousness that I spoke of earlier in this conversation or this little monologue here, it's like the seven natural laws, So you have the basic concept that all is mind, mentalism, consciousness, and that is really part of the nature of reality that I think is so important for us to all come to terms with, because I think in our culture, what we've been raised, and the reason why I got expansive and talked about the revolution to now is because what people don't realize is that during the revolution, veteran teacher and writer John Taylor Gatto, who wrote a couple of very important books. One of them was The Underground History of American Education, and also a little number called Dumbing Us Down. Now, in Dumbing Us Down, Gatto suggests to us that in colonial America at the time of the Revolution, among the non-slave classes in America, literacy rate was near 100%. Let's all let that sink in for a moment, okay? And among the slave classes, as much as 75%. And John Taylor Gatto did his homework. 35-plus year veteran, New York public schools. The book is extensively citations and notes and everything, and I've done the cross-referencing, and he's done his homework, let me tell you, people. So think about that, okay? Now, we know literacy was high because the war of public opinion during the Revolution was fought by the pamphleteers, such as Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense. Well, Common Sense sold 600,000 copies to 3 million colonists. And that's pretty good numbers, people. And we're not talking about Judith Krantz or James Patterson here either, which brings up another very important point to make about this. And that is the scale and measurement of literacy today, even the definition of the term literate. It seems that today's standard it's really hard to find this out. For literacy, it means being. Oops, sorry. Anyways.
Yeah, your phone's still working?
Yep, I just had somebody else calling through it. Sorry about that. But, what I'm trying to get to is that in today's standard for literacy means being able to follow written instructions, such as assembling a barbecue. And this standard for literacy, we are at in America today, so this is the standard, we're in the neighborhood of about 40% based on my research. So 40% can read instructions for barbecues? This is a gauge for literacy. A little better than half the rate of the slave literacy rates during the Revolution. Now, this is really important if you think about it. Because what he proposes, and what I would support, is that he proposes an elaborate conspiracy by the industrialists of the late 19th century to take over the education system of America and effectively dumb down the entire populace. And I would like to propose to everybody listening that, judging by the numbers, they have succeeded, and this is the problem. What Gatto lays down, the fact here is that in America, that there are basically, the entire education system can be summed up as an elaborate obedience training system. That basically there are only 3 things that you're taught in education in America. Number 1, show up on time. Don't be late. Don't be tardy. That's like a moral judgment. That don't be tardy. And don't be absent. That's really bad, right? That you'll develop bad work skills, they'll tell you, if you are absent from school. Number 2, you need to listen to your teacher, supervisor, manager, handler, and do what you're told. That's it. Obedience. Straight up. Number 3, do some rote, meaningless activity for the allotted period of time, and then when the bell rings, walk away like it didn't happen and don't take anything with you. Don't retain a thing. This is school. And I got to agree. Now, I was sent to private schools where education was at a varying scale. There were some better forms, better levels of education, I think, in some schools. But even there, that elaborate obedience training was always the fallback system. It was always in place. It's like a template that's in place. And so, self-knowledge and critical thinking, everyone, are so key to freedom and liberty. It is no wonder
that the word liber, from liberty, means book, right? Book knowledge is freedom and power. And another thing, everybody, that I'd like to say, because we are moving towards, I want to give time for people to ask questions or any comments. But, novelty and humor are very important as well. The power elite, the evil alien mind parasites feeding off humanity, can't relate to humor, nor do they understand novelty. They can't comprehend or control frivolous abandon, what the Gnostics called luminous epinoia, creative visualization and imagination from within. And that's all the more reason I would say to all the listeners out there to get in touch with your creative self. Get in touch with that creative self within you. This remains my hope for humanity. Art, music, joy, love, novelty. This is it, really. And, you see, a control meme was developed a long time ago, whereby catastrophes were commandeered and utilized to coerce humanity through fear into routine patterns of mediocrity, steeped in a narrow bandwidth, like we said, of sensory materialism, to the exclusion of intuition and critical thinking. Authority overtook free will and insight, and consciousness control went into full effect. And as we've already pointed out, communication always plays a pivotal role in constructing and maintaining the control paradigm. That's why multimedia is so important to all of this. And we just came from the Paranoia Conference in San Diego where the subject was mind control, and mind control especially in the media. We heard from guys like Lennon Honor and Jan Irvin from Gnostic Media. These guys have got it broken down into a science. They can put it up on the PowerPoint presentation for you and show you exactly how mind control is woven right into our media. And it's clearly going on. It has been going on since the beginning of radio, since the beginning of newspapers, and since probably a real short time after the revolution, after those pamphleteers got out of the way, But what we know is that multimedia in our postmodern age has ushered us all into a new age and a new level of virtual reality and thought control, and that's where we're at today. And what we have been so thoroughly indoctrinated and imprinted with teachings and beliefs from which we could, which are rooted in what I would call the Abrahamic religious memes, but more so in the current political correctness, where weaponized, labels like calling somebody a racist or a bigot or an anti-Semite, these weaponized terms are used to target and destroy free thinkers and people who question consensus and think outside the box. And so, that's a big thing that I would say is that, it's really important to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. Be, non-compliance, be a troublemaker, ask questions, and if he doesn't hurt your family and you to just not comply, then don't. If it's going to hurt somebody, I'm not trying to suggest that you do anything to hurt anyone, but if you can do it in a way that makes a statement, and that is a non-lethal statement, obviously, or non-painful statement to others, I say go for it, because now's the time to speak your mind. Now's the time to say what you think is right. And if you don't know, then learn. Believe in yourself, everybody. You can learn. I don't care how old you are. I don't care where you came from. I don't care. You can learn. Everyone, the most wonderful part of humanity is the fact that we always have the potential and the option to learn something new. And as long as we're still conscious, as long as we're still upright and able to move mobility and able to manipulate with our hands and put things together, we can learn stuff. And that should be the most exciting proposition today to everyone listening, is that you can learn something completely new and novel right now, starting right now. And that is the hope for humanity. So I guess with that, I'd pretty much open it up to Andrew, if you wanted to comment or questions, if you have anybody in the radio call lines or anything like that.
Well, someone in the chat room says, you know what you're talking about, a tarot. Sean Cohen says, yes, a story in each card and many symbols within each card. We got 10 minutes left. Well, actually, no, I can only give you maybe 9 minutes left. So might as well talk about that for a moment, and we'll talk about a whole slew of subjects I got written here tomorrow when I see you again. But the tarot, it has been said that the tarot cards, well, they have the ability to act like time is an illusion, which of course it is, in the sense that things in the tarot card are things that happen throughout history. Probably the most notable example is the Tower Tarot, which some people say symbolizes the World Trade Center on 9/11. In the Deviant Moon Tarot that I have, it shows a ray coming from the sky, from the moon. Kind of makes me wonder if the direct energy weapon that took down the Twin Towers was a death ray on a space-based platform in Earth's orbit. John Lear told me that that's what he believes was what did it, and not nuclear bombs and HAARP, as some others have suggested. But anyway, the point is the tarot predicting things throughout time. Would you assert that there is some truth to that?
What I would assert is that people in positions of power understand the impact of certain symbols and archetypes, emblems, these tools of consciousness for shaping awareness are used every single day. And the tarot is one of those sets of tools that has been usurped. It's like this. I mean, I can take a hammer, right, Andrew, and I can build an orphanage with that hammer. But I could also bludgeon someone to death with that hammer. So the hammer is not bad. The hammer is a tool that could build a house, an orphanage, or it could kill someone. So it's not the tool that's the evil. It's the intent in the hand wielding it, So the thing with the tarot is that I think that we are in the midst of a long-range, epoch-spanning plan that we have all been we've been born into this long before we were ever born. This plan of usurping all of humanity was in place, and I don't know if you're familiar with the books of the Dune saga, Frank Herbert books, but there's a part of that whole saga where there's this group called the Missionaria Protectiva. They're like a missionary group that's sent into areas that are going to be colonized eventually. And they're sent in, a century before. This is space, science fiction or whatever. But the point is that they plant seeds in the cultures and in the peoples, little seeds that are like universal seeds and archetypes that can be utilized by the priesthoods and the guilds that come later, who have the knowledge, who know the key words, who know the cognitive dissonance and the neurolinguistic programming to use to trigger in a people. And, that we're talking about society-wide mind control programs, utilizing iconography far beyond the tarot. I mean, we know they let the cat out of the bag in 1974. The SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, they wrote a paper called Changing Images of Man, and they read that paper to the government. It's on file. You can download it today, PDF file. In that document from 1974, they stated that the American people were moving towards a massive consciousness awakening, and that we were, as a people, right up to 2001, right around the time of 9/11, as a matter of fact, we were about to just awaken as a society and move into a greater state of awareness. And they said that in order to shepherd us away from that we ought to be guided by Masonic imagery and Egyptian iconography. And that's in the documents, government documents. You can get them online. It's a PDF that was printed a long time ago, and it's clearly, that was in 1974, right? So for the next 30, 40 years, look at all the media, look at all the Masonic imagery and the Egyptian iconography all over the media. I mean, music, television, movies, everywhere, comic books, everywhere, video games. It's unbelievable. But guess what? I wonder, I really do. You talked about the tower cards. Yeah, there's a lot to be said there. 2 towers make the number 11, which in the numerology of the Rosicrucians is the evil number, the number of evil. And then, of course, there's all the symbolism around the ground zero, the way that the towers were arranged. It was like a lodge setting. You've got the 47th problem of Euclid on the top of the Solomon Brothers building. It's just a little bit too coincidental for my liking. And then, of course, if you go back into American lore, you find out that George Washington, right after the Revolution ended, supposedly walked down to that spot right there where the towers were constructed. There was a chapel there, supposedly, in the 18th century. And he walked down to that spot and went inside and said a prayer for America, the new nation. Now, if that's just a legend or not, I don't know. I haven't been able to substantiate that. But if it was true, boy, that's a remarkable thing, that right in that very same spot, they could have co-opted the American dream maybe with a fear-based mind control program, right?
Yeah, right. And, well, in regards to 9/11, we know that they knew about it all the way back in 1971. Andrew Bashago talked about that on my show when I had him on my show, about how when he was in the time travel program, they used that to see 9/11 happen in 1971, which gave them 30 years to prepare for it. Of course, 9/11 truthers won't talk about that because they think it'll make them sound really crazy, and they have shunned Andrew Bashago, unfortunately, because of that, but that's kind of beside the point. I guess I could quickly do one.
But wait a minute, Andrew, that's actually a good point, though, because if you think about it, in the 70s is when they started building the towers. People don't realize that. Those towers were only there since the 70s. They were put up during, like, the Nixon administration. And so that right there is pretty suspect. I mean, right alone, just that fact, the timeline there. But then think about all the movies from that time, the 70s, up until the year 2000. How many backdrops had the Twin Towers in every single movie that we could think of in American cinematographic history? I mean, those two towers are like almost as iconographic as the Statue of Liberty. I mean, it really, in the films in the last 40 years, I would say, you see it over and over and over again. Any film, set in New York or whatever. So, the point is made. What was you had something else you wanted to address, Andrew?
Well, actually, we're not going to be able to discuss that in only in 2 minutes, but I do have a slew of subjects here that I will question about tomorrow, and I do encourage callers to call in if they want to call in tomorrow. I will get a message out that there's a part 2 to this. So I guess I'll, by the way, just out of curiosity, how much battery power do you have on your phone?
Right now I'm down to, I could probably go another 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. I got one bar left.
Never mind. We'll just wait till tomorrow. And again, I'll make sure I only cover news for 5 minutes tomorrow. Usually it's 10 minutes, but I'll make sure I only do 5 to make sure you get a lot of speaking time. So I will come prepared tomorrow, and we'll elaborate on all sorts of subjects.
Yeah, let's go ahead and invite the callers, listeners, to call in tomorrow. We'll have open phone lines, and we'll field questions, and we'll just we'll discuss different topics. And then if people want to call in and ask me questions about my experiences in the various orders and my insights and anything, well, I'd be happy to share what I have experienced.
Well, yeah, most of my listeners actually listen to the archives. They know I upload all these things to YouTube, so they usually check it out then, and I do air the show.
Same with mine. I get it, yep.
Yeah, so I don't know if we'll get many callers. I don't get a lot of callers often, and they're also often eating dinner at the time my show is airing, so that's also unfortunate. But even if we don't have callers, I can easily find enough questions to discuss. Again, I have some prepared already. So I guess I'll bid you good day. I will, by 11:59 p.m. Eastern tonight, have the link ready to part 2, the specific link, and I'll send you an email that what that URL is. So I guess I'll bid you good day, Frater X, and I'll see you tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Excellent, Andrew. Well, I hope that I satisfied you with some insights into things today, and I look forward to questions and comments tomorrow.
Yeah, just a quick point. Most of the stuff that you discussed today, was this basically all the stuff that you talked about in your Free Your Mind presentation at the conference in Philadelphia in April, or was that mostly different subjects than what you discussed today?
It's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of other stuff that I've talked about at I was at the Brave New Books in the spring in Austin, Texas, and then, like I said, I just came back from Paranoia conference in San Diego. So it's sort of like it's a combination. What I talked about at Free Your Mind conference, for anyone that would like to check that out, it's online. We have DVDs too if people wanted to find out about those at the website. You can find out about it at middlechamberfx.wordpress.com. But basically what I really did in that conference presentation with a PowerPoint and about 50 images was I broke down what I would call the false flag military history of America. And I start with, the revolution, and I work my way forward, and we go through every false flag event and show how, they're sculpted by the media one way, and here's the reality. And then we talk a lot about the the secret war on human consciousness, which is basically a theme that I've been working for the last couple of years, and it's a chapter in the book, The Secret War Inside Freemasonry. One chapter is called The Secret War on Human Consciousness because they overlap each other. And so that's something we can talk about some more tomorrow. And,
Maybe we will.
Yeah. All right. Sounds great.
Yeah, and I encourage people to watch that. It is on YouTube. All right, so take care. I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Have a great night. Good night, everyone.
Namaste, everybody. Good night. See you tomorrow.
How do you celebrate your anniversary? With colors like Party Time, Champagne, and Jubilee, we celebrate ours with color. Ask Sherwin-Williams and save 35% on paints and stains during our anniversary sale, August 15th through the 18th. Visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams paint store and save 35% today. Find your nearest store at sherwinwilliams.com/sale. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio on August 14th, 2014. I'm your host, Andrew Fisher, broadcasting normally every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, but we are doing a special part 2 of episode for my guest yesterday, Frater X. We are broadcasting from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern today, normally 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to expose the true and false nature of reality for what it is and what it isn't. Again, Frater X is my guest. Some misunderstanding issues. We can only do an hour show yesterday. We are going to finish up with part 2, another hour show today. I got a whole series of questions prepared. I'm sure he's going to find them quite interesting. He's not on the board yet. I actually don't expect him to call in because his phone will only last for an hour, and I told him call in at 5 after the hour, so we can definitely do the full hour. But while I'm waiting for him, I will cover the news, and I'll do this on the fly. I want to get him on at 5 after the hour. Boy, so many Ferguson articles. A big surprise here on Infowars.com. Former Seattle police chief, Ferguson military gear, an act of provocation. We have police taking a military response and making matters much worse. Yes, the powers that be, or the powers that should not be, as my recent guest John G. Vibes like to call them, they like to make things intimidating and harass people and make them feel helpless, so they'll militarize the police. That's the goal, because some people find the military comforting. Oh, they're here to keep us safe. No, that's the cover story. People, you have to understand, if your police are being militarized, you got to protest it, because it's all part of an intimidation tactic and has nothing to do with safety. Next article, Eyewitness. Ferguson cops allowed everybody to loot. They surrounded the entire community at each end and let everybody loot. Yeah, because they weren't there to catch the looters. They were there to harass people and intimidate people, and maybe they did some looting themselves. Next article, Ferguson cops get military equipment from feds. Even small cities receive wide range of Department of Defense arms under the 1033 program. I must say I'm not familiar with all the ins and outs of that program, but the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security would definitely be the ones who would militarize the police. And when FEMA comes into your community after your police are militarized, be careful. You don't want to go to FEMA camps. Next article, video. Police aim guns at reporters. Police show their intent to shoot the press before their assault in Ferguson, Missouri. Again, right next to this, there's an article, well, not an article, a picture that says, First Amendment dismantled in Missouri. What a shame, isn't it? Yeah, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, religion, freedom of peaceably assemble, freedom of the press, and right to petition the government for redress of grievances. It's funny how several years ago, I think actually was in 2005 or 2006, there was a study that found that while 1 to 1,000.1% of all Americans could name all 5 rights in the First Amendment, 22% of Americans could name all 5 members of the Simpsons family. Yeah, okay, that has nothing to do with Ferguson, Missouri. It's pretty sad nonetheless. Just came up because I mentioned the First Amendment, but it is being dismantled in Missouri. You have the right to do all those things, and the police aren't acting like it there. Next article, press suppression. InfoWars Twitter account suspended twice within 12 hours of creation. Suppression latest in ongoing purge of alternative media from Facebook and Twitter. Yeah, yesterday I read an article about how Facebook posts that had to do with InfoWars were being censored from Facebook. And next article here, the truth about the Ferguson riots and martial law. They want riots, they want martial law. Ferguson is a trial balloon for the entire country. How sad that the police murdering an innocent guy, this Michael Brown, who I think was 18 years old. Yeah, he was. He was about to start college, and all because of this town's gone to hell. What a shame. Next article. Marlon Wayans. Robin Williams' suicide likely caused by antidepressants. I don't think it's depression. I think it's chemical. Yes, and they won't blame the antidepressants because Big Pharma wants to make money. All right, last article. Video. Ferguson police tell reporters to turn off cameras before attacking press. Please turn off your video, a female voice recording tells journalists. Act like you understand that first of all, it's freedom of the press. Second of all, you have the right to film police. You have the right to film police. The state of Illinois is one place where they're notorious for not respecting the right to film police. But you do have the right to film police, and Ustream, I recommend getting a Ustream account, so if the police bash out your camera after you film them, you'll have it saved to Ustream, and then you can still sue the crap out of them. So that's it for the news. Let's see if... no, he hasn't called in yet. I'm sure he knows the show is on. I did talk to him about it. Maybe he's just he might call in any second. But while I'm waiting, I might as well go to my Gmail account here and send him an email. Oh, here he is. Oh, he said see you in 6 minutes, so he'll be calling in any second. Okay, I might as well reply. I'm on the air waiting. Good thing he knows the show is on. I will see him any second. Frater X, I do hope you charge your phone. Want you to be around for the full hour, because we can make this really interesting. You seem to know your stuff yesterday in regards to the history of secret societies, the whole thing about secrecy and how it works, and what else did we talk about? I always want to listen to radio interviews again so I can really digest them. Because when you're doing the show, it's not easy to digest it. What your guest is telling you, you got to concentrate on what you're going to be saying next, and it's hard to concentrate on what they're talking. So I always want to listen to my interviews a second time. And he said his Fear Mind conference presentation that he did. I did watch it. I just needed my memory refreshed. Was about something involving false flags. He still hasn't called in. I guess I might as well go back to Gmail and see if he knows the number. I wonder what the holdup could be. Did I type the wrong number? No, I gave the right number in the email. So he should be... there he is. Frater X, I just sent you a reply saying I'm on the air waiting. I guess you can disregard that because here you are. Glad to have you back on the air for the second part.
Hey, Andrew, how's it going?
Oh, it's going great. Just feel really relaxed. Got to sun gaze and sat out in nature like before this show to get really relaxed and mentally prepared. And so I guess I'm feeling energized. My batteries are energized thanks to the sun and nature. So anything you want to say before we start doing the questions that I've prepared? I'm sure you're going to like them.
No, yeah, I feel the same way. My wife and I went out to the lake today and sat on a blanket, and it was nice. We were ensconced in nature, and it was really quiet, and it was nice. So I feel you. I know what you're saying.
Right. So some things people, you seem to know your stuff. I love to listen to your to that first part again. When you're hosting a show, you can't digest all the info your guest is telling because you got to think about what you're going to say next. So I always will listen to my shows again, and I'll better digest the fascinating stuff you told us yesterday about history and secrecy and all the stuff that goes with it. But got some things I want to talk about, even though this may not be your area of expertise. You may not be an expert on this subject, but the whole issue of the Founding Fathers being Freemasons. Some people say it's not a big deal. The fact that they were Freemasons is irrelevant. They had good intentions. They cared for the common people. They were fighting for liberty. They were compartmentalized, and even 33rd degree Freemasons like Benjamin Franklin would have no idea what was going on in the Illuminati ladder of authority above them, because there's so much compartmentalization. But other people, such as David Icke, as much as I respect David Icke, one thing disturbs me about him is that he sometimes demonizes the founding fathers, for lack of a better word, by saying Franklin was a Satanist, Jefferson was a slave owner. This was all part of a plot to turn America from a prison with bars into a prison without bars under the guise of freedom and independence. Well, others would assert the founding fathers had no idea that was the plot. They were trying to fight for freedom. So what do you know about the extent to which the founding fathers were in on the conspiracy to turn America into a prison with bars into a prison without bars?
Well, I think that my research has indicated that it was sort of a split camp. You know, there was some within the group of individuals who were, you know, for lack of better terms, who were engineering the society that we live in. You know, I think some of them had the good intentions that, you know, John Locke, the Age of Enlightenment, you know, and the idea of Thomas Paine's Rights of Man and all. I think there was idealism there, but I also believe that there were agents involved that had a specific agenda. I mean, we know that and you know, it may seem a little too mundane and practical for some, but we know that the banking concerns, the international banking concerns, were right there involved, right at the ground floor of the Organization of America, the government, and everything, because, you know, Alexander Hamilton, who was an agent of the Rothschilds, and he clearly established the first central bank. He was the main prime motivator behind it, prime mover. And, you know, with that establishment, we had the first means of extracting wealth on a wholesale level from the population, you know, the productive wealth of the population of America. And so there was a conflict right away, I think, because I think you had idealism. You had those who really entertained the notion that this could be something great here in America. And then maybe you could call that my own personal civic mythology or idealism, if you will, but I honestly believe that there were some that did have those high ideals and those expansive views of America as what it could be. But at the same time, I also believe that there were agents of the Illuminati, for lack of better terms. You know, there were agents of foreign interests, mostly banking interests, international banking interests, who had designs on creating a fully mobilized and industrialized population, that they were forward-thinking. They saw the Industrial Revolution in all of its potential, and they moved forward towards that. I mean, going back to the central banking issue for just a moment, okay? So you have, even before the Treaty of Paris was signed, that's the treaty in 1781, which ended the revolution, you know, ended the war between America and England. Even before that was signed, there was a Bank of North America. The charter was already written and established. So before they even ceased fire in the revolution, before the American government was even established, fully freed from the English tyranny, they already had Bank of North America in place. And 4 years later, the new Congress refused to renew that charter. That's very remarkable, a remarkable point to make. And then after that, the first Bank of the United States started. Again, Alexander Hamilton, 1791. And 80% of the capital came from the bank, you know. And again, 1811, renewal of the charter, defeated in Congress. And that's when Nathan Rothschild threatened war with Britain. He said there would be blood in the streets of Washington, D.C. Nathan Rothschild, if we didn't sign a charter and centralize the banking system of America. First of all, I want to know why. What was his dog in the fight, anyways, right? But secondly, what happened? That was in 1811, War of 1812. Washington, D.C. burns down. So these are the early days. And of course, if you go to the Library of Congress archives and type in the letters of George Washington, reference to the Bavarian Illuminati, there are two letters that will pop up, and one of them was a reference because someone had sent him the book Proofs of Conspiracy by John Robison. And when he received that book, they were asking him, and this was like late 1790s, I think, or whatever. It was really late in the 1700s, and they were asking him what he thought about this. And at first he was sort of like, oh, yeah, there may be something to that, but not a real big deal. But after he had retired, after he had finished his term, he wrote a second letter, and it was again in reference to this book, and he had said, now, it had been a couple of years since that first reference, and he had said that he had done some, obviously he had done some research, because he had said no one knew better than him that there was a presence of a Germanic Illuminati or Bavarian Illuminati in our government. And that was, before we even entered the 19th century. George Washington saying so. Almost like Eisenhower's speech or something, But the bottom line here is that that's how we began the 19th century in America. And anybody that knows, if you look at the history of Thomas Jefferson's run for the White House, Jefferson's election cycle was rife with rhetoric about the Illuminati. He himself was under scrutiny because although, and I cannot find any evidence that he actually belonged to any Masonic lodges in America, so he technically was not a Freemason by the normal standards. But supposedly he was a member of the Lodge of Nine Muses in France, which was an irregular Masonic lodge. So he could have been a French Mason, a member of that lodge, which wasn't recognized by the Grand Lodges of England. Still isn't to this day, as a matter of fact, because the French Grand Orient basically allows atheists and women to join the lodges, and that was, contrary to the English craft Masonry tradition, So, but the point is that Jefferson's election was totally run through with all kinds of accusations from his opponents that he was compromised, that his intentions were to serve his Illuminati masters and not the people of America. And remember, we're talking about the Republic of America, so this is the way this democracy was set up, is that our elected officials have take sworn obligations to the Constitution and serve the people of this nation. So, but that goes at odds with certain secret societies and esoteric fraternal initiatory orders that require you to take oaths of allegiance and obligations to them. As a matter of fact, when you join the Scottish Rite, first of all, when you join the Freemasons Lodge, the Blue Lodge, all the oaths you take are taken. It's explicitly stated within the oaths that no obligation is made upon you that will cause you to betray your family or your country or your own honor. That's what is instructed in the ritual. And you are not, even when you say you're going to keep the secrets of Masons and Masonry as part of the obligation, it says murder and treason notwithstanding. So I guess everything up to murder and treason you're allowed to keep secret within the lodge. But after that, you should call the authorities, which is kind of a wide range of things that you can allow, I guess. But with the Scottish Rite Supreme Council, when you join the Scottish Rite, again, we talked about this yesterday, a side order that requires that you be a Blue Lodge Freemason first. When you join the Scottish Rite now, you are taking an oath of fealty to the Supreme Council above all other obligations. That's to your family, to your religion, to your community, to your country, everything. So that's an interesting difference. Now, the Scottish Rite proper that has this establishment was not fully established at that time in the early 1800s. It was just a fledgling organization, barely midwifed into the scene of fraternal orders. But it did have a presence, and the individuals involved were key people involved in government, business, and industry. So these are the things we need to look at when we're talking about the early formations of America. So right at the same time that the Supreme Council claims its existence was in 1802, 1803, right around the time when Jefferson was basically experiencing extreme criticism from his opponents politically with his associations with foreign Illuminatis. And the Scottish Rite Supreme Council in Charleston was clearly connected with Continental Masonry, foreign initiatory, what could be considered Illuminati-like lodges and organizations. So that's just for your record.
All right, thanks for giving your take on that. Speaking of lodges, interesting how, interesting but yet not surprising, in Philadelphia there is a Masonic lodge right next to City Hall. I like to make reference to that whenever I go to a protest or a rally in Philadelphia, maybe shout through my bullhorn when I walk by the lodge. You Freemasons need to wake up to the fact that you're in on the conspiracy. And Philly's
interesting. I've been to Philly too a few times, and you go into Independence Mall where they have the statue or the Liberty Bell and the where you've read the Declaration of Independence in that same area, and you've got the four horsemen of the financial and global apocalypse. You've got like Wells Fargo Bank on one side, the Federal Reserve on the other side, Dow Chemical over here. It's just like, whoa, you're standing in the middle of the maelstrom there,
Yeah, I have noticed that. I know, yes. And also, and the police always keep a close eye on us whenever we rally. It doesn't really seem very independent and free there. But anyway, moving on to another, lodge. I don't know if the word lodge is right. More cult is probably the right word. This may not be your area of expertise, again, because you're focused on America. But the Vatican, they say that it is the most powerful and most despicable Illuminati organization. And former 33rd degree Freemason turned whistleblower Leo Zagami talked about how there is a giant reptilian base under the Vatican where reptile aliens plan to do their dirty work. So what do you want to tell us about the Vatican, if you know anything about it, and what I said about the reptilian base underground?
Well, I wish I knew about that. I wish I had information to share. I don't have any specific information about reptilian bases, but I have. We've all heard about the library underneath the Vatican. That's miles and miles long tram system with all the hidden. I've heard that basically 90% of all the accumulated knowledge of humanity is 90%. We have about 10 that they've let us have. The other 90 is down there in the Vatican libraries. But the really important thing to think about with relation to the Vatican, the Church, and these esoteric orders, fraternal orders, especially those like connected to Freemasonry and the Hermetic philosophies in general, is that we talked about this a little bit in our last conversation, that there was a distinct, it all goes back to England. And, the time of King Henry, he wanted to make himself the head of the Church of England. He basically was he saw himself as a mystic, as somebody who was connected to God, or at least he wanted to be seen as somebody who was a religious holy man. He wanted to set himself up as the bishop of the church, as a vicar to Christ. He wanted to be a pope, really, because he felt divinely, called or whatever. This is what people have interpreted from his actions, and I tend to kind of follow along the same lines. It seems like this was what he was doing. But really, I think at the core issue, he was a capitalist. He wanted the money. There was a lot of money woven into the church around England. They had huge land holdings. They had valuable property, commodities, resources that were necessary for Henry's campaigns and plans for England, and basically he had to have that money, and he also wanted the control, I think the temporal control that was exerted by the church over the world. And so, they always talk about the divorce and the wives and everything is the main motivator, but I think there was more to the story. But inevitably what happened was when he kicked the church out of England, they shut down the holy orders, all the initiatory rites that were provided, that were available to people of mystical orientation per se, or people who were drawn to spiritual systems. There wasn't a replacement right away. The Church of England was offering it was modifying and offering systems that would meet that need or meet that goal of the seeker, so to speak. So the initiatory orders, the Hermetic secret societies that had already formed, that were already underground because they feared the persecution of the Church, of the Inquisition and such, they sort of filled in the vacuum, I think, that once was held by the holy orders, like the Franciscans or the Dominicans or the other various holy initiatory orders that were sanctioned by the church. So the Freemasonic lodges and the lodges that were associated with the ancient wisdom that was becoming available in the time of the Enlightenment, and also moving into the Enlightenment and then moving into the Renaissance, the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment. So this was what was being sort of filled in. This was what was being offered as a means for the individual to communicate with the divine. And so, basically this created a huge wedge between the church and Freemasonry proper and all of its dependent orders and organizations. So everything through history from that time moving forward, and speaking of which, agents of provocateurs like Leo Taxil, everybody knows about him. He's the guy that his book cover was the one about Freemasonry that has the picture of Baphomet on it, the goat-headed image that's very famous and popular from like the 19th century. This was an expose done by a Leo Taxil. Well, it turns out that after it all was said and done, he brought out a woman named Diana Vaughan, who was supposed to be, at the time, she was the sensationalist person who had been inside the dark demonic lodges and was coming forward and exposing the satanic practices of the lodges. Well, after this big splash promotionally went over in the 1800s, Taxil came forward and said that he was faking it. That it was all contrived. That he had made the whole thing up. Diana Vaughan wasn't even a real person. So, and yet she's still referred to today in modern publications that trace the Illuminati or the idea of a satanic core within Freemasonry. So the reason why I bring all this up is because Taxil was, in fact, Jesuit trained. He was actually probably a secret initiate of the Jesuits, because we find oftentimes in history these individuals that come forward and have a certain impact on things. Turns out later on we find, you know what? He was Jesuit trained, or she was, schooled by the Jesuits, or trained by the. It's really remarkable. And so it's sort of a digression from the question, but I just wanted to point out that I really honestly believe that early on an animosity formed between the church and Freemasonry and all these, fraternal initiatory orders, esoteric schools, so that it created a constant flow of disinformation and propaganda back and forth between the two. Does that mean that there's not something going on? Absolutely not. I mean, gosh, looking at the last few popes and Pope John Paul I, his 33-day reign, and then all the circumstances surrounding that and the P2 scandal. I mean, there's obviously something sketchy going on in the Vatican and the College of Cardinals. And, I mean, it is clearly, with all that we've heard, look at the exposés that have come out in the last 20 years with regards to the church's involvement, and it was even more than 20 years, in the last 30, 40 years, the church's involvement in smuggling Nazis out of Germany and into South America, after the war. So the church was literally hiding Nazi war criminals as priests and smuggling them on the rat line, along the monastery line throughout Europe. Why would they do that? And why would they protect so many pedophiles if it's not connected to what we've heard being so much information that's been put forth that clearly indicates there is a worldwide pedophile ring connected to satanic ritual abuse, even if they're not really invoking Satan and interacting with him. They're doing something they believe is in that realm, and they're hurting little children while they're doing it, So it's this kind of stuff is obviously going on. Now, the idea of a reptilian base beneath the Vatican, I mean, I don't have any personal information about that, but David Icke makes a lot of claims. I've been very interested in his material and others. I interviewed Kathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips, author of Transformation of America and the new one, Access Denied. She was the first one to mention shape-shifting reptilians when she supposedly came into contact with the Mexican president back in the 80s, I believe, and also George Bush, the father, Herbert Walker Bush. So, and then right afterwards I read The Biggest Secret by David Icke, and he talked about the reptilians as well. Not knowing, can't prove the specifics here, but I can tell you from my research into the Nephilim, into the whole idea of the Book of Enoch and the fallen angels, and I've done a lot of research and talked a lot about this on different radio shows. It really, to give a quick breakdown of it, the idea from the Book of Enoch is that the world went bad because the Watchers came down,
bred with humans, and according to Genesis chapter 6, created giants, monsters, and the heroes of old. These are half-breeds from the Watchers and the daughters of Adam, and they call them the Nephilim. Well, according to the book of Enoch, that's why God made the flood, to wipe out this abomination that had occurred on the earth. And as a matter of fact, for everybody listening, from the time of Jared, when the Watchers first came down, to the time of Noah, the flood, was 1,190-plus years. So during that time, the Watchers interacted with the humans over a millennia. And according to the book of Enoch, they taught them all the dark arts and all the black magic and all the forbidden knowledge that humanity was supposed to not know. It wasn't meant for them. They taught them all. And that's all the stuff we have survived today, the traditions. And when the flood happened, the Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers and humans, were wiped out. The giants and the monsters, the chimera, and all these strange creatures that were born of the breeding between humans and angels. Well, here's the interesting part. In the legend, it says that these beings, these Nephilim, these offspring, were half earthling. You know, they were human. And the other half was divine, angelic, alien, if you want. I'm not saying, I don't know for sure, but extraterrestrial nonetheless. And when they died, when their mortal side was destroyed, the earthbound part of them was destroyed, their spirits remained immortal and bound to the earth. And so, according to legends, these evil spirits of the dead Nephilim are what have haunted humanity all through the ages ever since. And so this is what I think where we get into the different demonic possessions, the satanic ritual cults that form, and the people who get involved in all of these unbelievable acts of inhumanity and cruelty and just horror that go on in our human culture throughout the ages, the different things that people have come up with, and then they claim they're interacting with spirits and demons. This is a source, a core. And so when you talk about David Icke's theories of these fourth-dimensional reptilians that are trapped, and they can only come in through what? Through people, through channeling through certain people. You connect that with the old legends of the changelings. There's been legends in folklore going back to old Europe that when somebody would come to close to death, when a child or an old person would come really close to death and then suddenly have a remission, they'd think that changeling had occurred, that an evil spirit will take the body right before the moment of death and basically inhabit the body. And according to these legends, they'd always talk about these individuals coming out of a near-death experience and there being something strange about them, being touched in a different way. You know, they acted different. They were more aggressive or more sociopathic than before. So it's just all these things together. I think there's something to all this. There's a connection here. And I think that what we know about egregores are thought forms that are drawn to human activity and human grouping, the ecclesia, the gathering of humans in the Greek. And so they're evil and they're negative and they're positive, evil and good egregores. And lodges or churches or holy orders or any kind of organization where people come together and do a thing like a ritual over and over again, month in, month out, year in, year out, day in, day out, hour in, hour out, that these things form patterns in the spiritual realm, in the ambient, etheric energy grid that's around us. And there are elemental forces out there that are independent of our will, that have their own will. Disembodied spirits, according to the Greek, was daemon. Daemon means a disembodied spirit. It's an elemental force without a body that has its own will. And so if people gather and draw an energy force to them, and they're attracted to the gathering and attracted to the activity, and they want to perpetuate that activity, they'll draw other individuals towards this group, and they'll feed this group energy in order to receive energy in an energy exchange. It's almost like a Doctor Who episode or something, really, if you think about it. It's like these strange, invisible alien entities out there that can latch on to people and latch on to groups of people and feed on them, feed on the energy that is generated from the activities they're involved in.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed, and a lot of research still needs to be done. Next thing I want to do, I want to try to kill two birds with one stone by talking about two different symbolism that is prominent in the Illuminati. The first is Saturn symbolism. David Icke has recently said a lot of what he and other researchers thought was sun symbolism is actually Saturn symbolism. One notable feature is a crescent shape you might see around like certain symbols that he claims to symbolize the luminous crescent that was around Saturn when stuff within it exploded back in before the solar system cataclysm of like 9,500 years ago, where Saturn was a lot closer to the Earth. That's what he says anyway, and very prominent in the Illuminati and the religions, he says. And one other symbol that Jordan Maxwell popularized was Dawn of a New Day symbolism. It was the symbolism that was associated with Obama in his 2008 campaign, and it's being associated with Obamacare too, with like a sun rising in the background, and there's a field you can see in the front. Maxwell claims that has its roots in the Soviet Union, and of course the communism of the Soviet Union has its roots to the Bavarian Illuminati, which was formed on May Day 1776. Connect the dots, it leads you a lot of interesting places. So try to kill two birds with one stone here: Saturn symbolism and Dawn of a New Day symbolism. What can you tell us?
Okay, well, Saturn, of course, is Chronos, also in the Greek, so he's the time, the god of time, right? So time, measurement of time. This is important stuff, because what is time, everyone? Time is merely a measurement of movement through space. That's what time is. So we give time so much meaning beyond that, though. We create a false reality around the concept of time. And I think there's a reason for that. I think because at the ancient Greeks, the Gnostics believed that archons, which were in fact these disembodied, almost abortive beings that were inorganic outside of the earth, like what we might call the alien greys today. But they believed that these archons established through their demiurge, which was this false anti-god they called Yaldabaoth, which was the demiurge, which was the opposite of the true creator, the one creator of all the universe, the pleroma, the oneness, the source, the emanation of the galaxy. And they believed these inorganic beings basically created Saturn and the solar system as a means of creating what they called a stereoma, a false counterclock world or counterclock galaxy. And this is important because, again, the definition of time is the measurement of movement through space. So when you're talking about creating a false counterclock reality, inorganic solar systems, that's how we're measuring time, is by measuring the movement of the stars and the space around us. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying, wow, isn't that interesting? And if I was a guy who had intents on creating a secret society millennia ago, boy, invoking the imagery and the ideas of Chronos and Saturn and the idea of controlling reality through false fabrications, that, boy, wouldn't it be a useful tool, the imagery of Saturn, right? So that's something to consider. And what was the second part? You said the first part was Saturn. The second part was
Dawn of a New Day.
Oh, yes. The symbol of Obama's campaign. All right, I immediately latched onto this when I first saw the symbolism. And, it's quite remarkable because first of all, the idea of the what we would call the native revival or archaic revival. Terence McKenna used it, and we know now Jan Irvin from Gnostic Media and Joseph Atwill, who wrote Caesar's Messiah. They've done a lot of work with psychedelic intelligence and the idea of the CIA and other military intelligence organizations being involved in the drug counterculture, the actual creation of the drug counterculture in America and in England and other places as a means of controlling the population through suggestion and through misdirection. And, so this is in the 50s and 60s is what they're focused on. But what we find out when we do the research and look back, this is not a new phenomenon. In fact, going back to the 18th century, the idea of using occult ideas, right, to inspire almost what could be considered socialism, because you're getting caught up in the whole paganism, and the country, paganini from the Greek means country dweller, farmers, and we all know that the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian Revolution was fought by the peasant farmers, right? I mean, before the
the Soviets and the Bolsheviks took over, that was a peasant uprising, and that was a people who were inspired by mystical insights and visions from visionary people who were sensitive, seers, practitioners of occult techniques. So you got to ask yourself, knowing what happened, knowing how it all turned out in Russia, in the Soviet Union, you got to ask yourself, was there something to this? And in fact, I think we find that there was something to it, and that this is a tool that's been used by governments, by intelligence organizations, by associations of people who wish to control the masses, by inspiring different occult symbolism. And like we talked about yesterday, the changing images of man from the SRI, Stanford Research Institute, how they knew they could lead consciousness through Masonic imagery and, sorry about this, somebody's trying to call in, and Egyptian iconography. So we know they use these tools. Now, look at that image of Obama's campaign picture. You see this orb, a circle, rising, like the sun, rising over a field, as you mentioned. And the field has the stars and stripes across it, like the flag. Now, what we know about the stars and stripes and the flag is that the flag, stars and stripes, represent what? The blood, sweat, and tears of the people of America. That's what they represent. So Obama's invincible sun, Sol Invictus, the cult of the sun, the orb, the one rising up over the field of the blood, sweat, and tears of the people of America. It's just interesting symbolism, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. By the way, we got about 18 minutes left. A couple of more things I want to talk about here. First of all, let's talk about the subject of Anunnaki for a moment, because this term Anunnaki has caused a lot of misconceptions. Some people think the Anunnaki for the reptilians. Well, no, actually the Anunnaki interbred with the reptilians in a 20-part interview series that Andrew Bartzis, Akashic Records reader and my favorite source of information, because he can't go wrong with his Akashic Records, he claimed that Zecharia Sitchin's first 3 books are extremely accurate. In other words, yeah, there is a planet Nibiru out there, and the Anunnaki come from it, and yes, the Anunnaki genetically engineered humans by combining Homo erectus DNA with Anunnaki DNA to create Homo sapiens about 480,000 years ago, although Sitchin was wrong about the reason they wanted the gold and also why they came to Earth. They were actually Lord Earth. But the point I'm trying to make here is there are some who assert that at the top of the Illuminati ladder of authority, it's not the reptilian aliens. Some people assert it's actually the Anunnaki from Nibiru, and George Kavassilis, who I interviewed, said that the term Anunnaki should really refer to a hodgepodge of different extraterrestrial races who are the children of a universal geneticist entity known as Anu, and the Anunnaki from Nibiru are just one faction of that, and they're mostly malevolent, but not entirely. There are some benevolent Anunnaki out there. But now that I've brought this to your attention, does the term Anunnaki, is there anything about that you want to point out?
Yeah, those from heaven who came down to earth, right? That's
yeah.
I started reading those books. Well, it's been a long time now. When I first came across the Earth Chronicles, the 12th Planet of Zecharia Sitchin, I had already read Eric von Daniken's books, and I had already looked at a few other books of the same vein, but I was really blown away, and I really found it fascinating, The Lost Book of Enki, which was one of his later books. But, a lot of that, a lot of that stuff is really, he took a lot of license. We know he elaborated. I mean, there's no way, some of his translations of Sanskrit, or excuse me, of the cuneiform, he's taking license. He wasn't the only guy that could translate. He was just one of few that could. And some of the other ones, and there are more now that can translate the cuneiform text. And so, we know that he took a lot of liberties with his interpretations of those scriptures. Now, having said that, putting that aside, I think there is some validity to all this. But there are a lot of people out there that have some interesting theories. And one of the theories I'd like to entertain with your audience is, don't you find it remarkable that in mainstream media, which I already suspect to be an elaborate programming, mind control program and propaganda, mass consciousness, wielding system, right? So in our multimedia today, we have all this talk about alien astronauts and the alien, interventionism. It's the new, intelligent design theory, and everybody's bought into it. And I'm not saying there's not something to the idea of interspecies involvement and, of outer species, extraterrestrials coming in and interacting with humans and maybe even genetically interacting with humans. I'm not saying that didn't happen. But what I don't like about the belief, the wholesale belief in the alien interventionism, is I don't like the idea of somebody trying to tell me that we're all just a slave experiment, that we're all just a slave species that was designed to serve this other species, Anunnaki. What I think is, and what I'm more inclined to believe, and there's researchers like John Lamb Lash out there, who's done a lot of work with reclaiming and restoring ancient Gnostic material, that there might, in fact, be an elaborate misinformation campaign that was perpetrated on humanity thousands of years ago with the deliberate placing of this idea, this meme of the alien intervention into human development into the records, as it were, with the Library of Arshabinipal, which turns up in the sands of Mesopotamia. Some Russian and German archaeologists uncover it in the 1830s, I believe. So I put out the question: isn't it remarkable that we would move from one meme of religious ideas about who we are in the universe, where we come from, and where we're going, to another meme about who we are, where we're going? But in both cases, we are merely slaves to some other, higher and mightier form of life that we are basically created to worship and to serve. And I'm more inclined to buy into the more indigenous view of human development these days. The views of the native tribes and the Mesoamerican beliefs of the Central and South America and North American beliefs, and around the world, like the Aboriginal beliefs or the Origine beliefs, which basically claim that, in fact, humans were developing just fine on Earth, all on their own, long before any other species, any invaders, outsiders, mutants came in and started messing with us. Now, I would propose to your listeners that, boy, wouldn't that explain what's happened in the last 10 millennia as far as the really drastic turn we've taken as a species away from a more balanced approach to reality, And so to me, it's a great explanation to think that when we talked about yesterday, this whole idea of a secret war on human consciousness, that about 10,000 to 13,000 years ago, there was some sort of species-wide post-traumatic stress disorder, a moment where somebody stepped in and took control, and boy, doesn't that fit right in with that timeline? So I propose to people that quite possibly that could be it. Now, putting that aside, I'm interested in what George was saying about the conglomeration of these species. There's a lot to be said for that. I've done some research in the idea of the children of Anu. The Anu was the main progenitor of these races of beings that formed under this confederacy we call the Anunnaki, right? They didn't call themselves that either, right? I mean, that was something that was a title that was applied to them. So that's another thing to consider. But it's a really interesting, what I think should be most exciting to people and most intriguing is that we weren't told these things for so long, that all this stuff exists, that this is part of the records, and we weren't given this information readily. It was sort of overlooked or deliberately sidestepped in the at least when I was in school, we never heard anything about any of this. So, yeah, I think it's remarkable. There's something to be looked at, but I hope I've answered your question somewhat.
Yeah, you did, and I can give you 10 minutes on this one subject. We can finish up with this. Sacred geometry. Andrew Bartzis says that the most evil thing on planet Earth is not the Vatican, it's the malevolent sacred geometry. And maybe there's some sacred geometry below the Earth and above the Earth that harasses and harms us. I'm sure there is. So with that being said, with their sacred geometry all over the place, that, well, it's not supposed to necessarily be bad. In my interview with Marty Leeds, we talked about how there is no such thing as a malevolent symbol. It's only malevolent because it's been twisted to be malevolent. So in regards to sacred geometry and its effects on humanity, what can you tell us? You've got 10 minutes.
Well, I tend to agree with Marty. And like I said yesterday about the hammer analogy, a hammer can build an orphanage or it can kill someone. You can beat somebody to death with a hammer or you can build an orphanage. So it's really about how you use that tool. I think I understand why he would make that statement, though, because, we know that America was founded by grid builders. I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Ross Ben, and his work at rossben.com, I believe, or rossben.net, RASBEN. He's written a book about Mystic Philadelphia, where he talks about the ancient Lenape tribes and the Algonquin Nation that were living in the ancient waterways around the old Philly town area where the three rivers meet, and how this was, in fact, considered by the people, the Lenape, as the most sacred and most powerful spot on the earth where they lived. The mound, like in the movie Rocky, where he runs up those steps and he's cheering and everybody's cheering and he's jumping up and down, that's the mound, the sacred mound, Mystic Mound, where they have the art museum that Benjamin Franklin built right on the top of it, as a matter of fact. These gentlemen knew. They knew. There were already Rosicrucian alchemists and geomantic-minded people in that area, some of the earliest colonists that showed up started their own, Rosicrucian cult, on the outskirts of Philadelphia. So what, you think it's just a coincidence they showed up there? Well, what we know is on the very spot that the Lenape said, if you begin a thing on this spot, you will have the full participation of the earth. That's what they said. So what did we do, or the colonists, the founders of America? They basically read the Declaration of Independence, the beginning of the nation of America, on that exact spot. They read the Declaration of Independence, which started the revolution, which started the nation of America. And that was where these grids meet. There's 7 ley lines that cross right on that exact spot. And they go across the entire nation. 7, by the way. And let us not forget that when Sir Walter Raleigh first came to Virginia, the man who brought tobacco back to England, right, he was armed with the charts of one Dr. John Dee, who was a close friend of his. John Dee, in fact, was famous for transmitting or receiving the Enochian magical system, him and Sir Edward Kelly. They basically channeled through scrying the entire Enochian system from the angels, quote-unquote, that they believed were the ones that had spoke to Enoch. That's why they call it the Enochian system. So these angels from the Bible, they believed, who had spoke to the patriarchs. Remember, we talked about the book of Enoch, so those angels, those fallen ones, like the watchers that came down, right? You mean those who came down? Kind of like, that other word, Anunnaki, those from heaven who came down. Wow, remarkable parallel right there, right? So back to the point, what John Dee accomplished with the help of the angels that he invoked was to map out the grid of the earth into 91 or 92 parts. 92 parts of the earth. So every single corner of the earth had a designated line, grid, geomantic, crisscrossing pattern where he was told what angels ruled that area, what word of power resided there, and what one might expect to gain from the attributes of this area. So they knew all this before they even came to America. So, sacred geometry, hugely employed, I believe, in the the secret founding of America. There's a book out there called The Secret Founding of America by Nicholas Hadjar, which I recommend your readers check out. It's a really interesting. One of the chapters in that book is called Freemasonry's Battle for America, which I got a lot of material for my book, The Secret War Inside Freemasonry, out of.
All right, maybe we could do one more subject here. I can only give you about 5 minutes, though. You mentioned the term definition a lot. It's interesting you talked about that because I'm currently watching the 2-part program, The Golden Web. It's part 2. I'm just started watching. They were talking about definitions a lot in that documentary. They're also going to talk about the Saturn-Moon matrix, where the moon amplifies energy from Saturn to put us in a matrix. Don't have time to talk about that, but the point of the documentary is definitions. There's a reason why we have words that sound the same, like world, and like world to be spun around, and we're world into the world is one thing that I seem to remember. And they said the term definition actually is meant to sound like deaf phonetians. But the point I'm trying to make is this whole thing about words sounding the same but being spelled differently. It's all part of the matrix that we are in, and I guess maybe the Saturn Moon matrix does correlate with that a bit. So I can only give you about 5 minutes. So what do you want to say about this whole subject about definitions in the matrix?
Yeah, Mark Passio from WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com does a really great segment on green language and on the idea of the substitution. The substitutionary actions are huge. The misdirection, like illusionists, like card tricks or parlor magicians. That's what we're dealing with here, people. This is the level of information war that we're dealing with. So when you hear words that sound like other words, it's not just a coincidence. It's a deliberate substitution. In Freemasonry, when a Master Mason is raised to the 3rd degree and is made a member of the lodge, he receives the grand secret word, right? The big deal, right? It's a substitute word. It's not the word. It's a substitute. Wow, that's huge. Why? Why is misdirection being employed? My thinking right away, cognitive dissonance. In our world, a world that wants to control the masses, cognitive dissonance keeps people in a state of anxiety and in a state of uncertainty. And so substitution of words is a great way to create cognitive dissonance.
Yes, cognitive dissonance. That's one reason why humanity is stuck in this prison planet. We don't have time to talk about false flags, but it goes without saying one of the maybe you can tell me whether you agree or disagree with this, because I can give you 3 minutes. Do you think it's fair to say that the reason it's easy for governments to get away with committing false flags is because people can't handle the truth, so they will deliberately act stupid and cognitively dissonant to just move on with their lives and forget about it?
Yes, I think that average people just can't believe that the government would be lying to them in such tremendous wholesale fashion. Mark Twain said it best: "It is easier to fool a man than to convince him that he is being fooled." That's the truth. It's just easier. People are more willing to be fooled than to be convinced that they're already being fooled.
Yeah, and 9/11 will be anniversaries coming up. I'll be at ground zero. I'll try to wake people up. I might get a little criticism, though, from some of my fellow truthers. I realize the scientific method shows that the buildings were dustified by a direct energy weapon, and also the planes that hit the Twin Towers were holograms. I had guests on my show, John Lear and Jim Fetzer, who explained all the science behind that. But you know how 9/11 truthers can be. They can be picky and say, don't talk about that kind of crazy stuff. It's going to make us look bad. And I'm thinking, stop worrying about your reputation. And if it fits the scientific method, then for the love of God, give me the chance to talk about it. But it's a shame.
Yeah, Andrew, Jim Fetzer's a great guy. I haven't spoken with John Lear, but I've heard him on other shows. Their research is worth looking at. We just had Jim on our show, and I just want to remind everybody, The Middle Chamber is on SyncBook Radio Network over at thesyncbook.com. That's SYNC book.com, and that's myself, Frater X, and my wife, Mater X. We co-host the show every week. On Saturday nights, we release a new podcast. We just had Jim on, and we talked about the Sandy Hook, 9/11, Apollo moon hoax. We covered the gambit as much as we can, but he's another one. He carries so much information. It's just, you could do a seminar with the guy. And I've actually met Jim at Free Your Mind Conference, too. Really, really nice guy. Very humble individual who I believe is honestly on a mission, to just bring the truth out. And people who get closed-minded about, we can't be afraid to let our beliefs be challenged, everybody, because if they're real, there's no stopping it. If it's true, it's true. It doesn't matter. Emotions attached to outcomes, having a dog in the fight, I certainly understand all that. I have a lot of emotional convictions, and I've got dogs in all kinds of fights. But in the end, if I'm going to be on the side of truth, I have to be willing to say if I'm wrong or if I'm mistaken about something. I have to be willing to hear another side. And that's, Jim Fetzer's come under a lot of fire from the truther movement, the truthers out there, because he started talking the dialogue about alternative energies being involved in the 9/11. He was one of the first guys to say, wait a second, this thermite thing doesn't quite add up, to what we're being told. And so what we know and what we can find out from experts, so his dialogue and his rhetoric is commendable because he was willing to challenge his own beliefs and the beliefs of his scholars for 9/11 truth, you know what I mean? And so, it caused a huge uproar and a splinter group and everything and all that stuff because he is a man committed to the truth. At least
he's
got me convinced, anyways. So but anyways, Andrew, great talking to you again, and we encourage people to come over and check out my blog too, fraterx.blogspot.com, and I'll be interested to hear how things go at Ground Zero. Are you going to broadcast from the area?
No, I think I'm just going to be loud and tell the truth, and all, but. Well, I've only got 60 seconds, so I might as well bid you good day. But, hey, I'll tell you the same thing I tell all my guests. I got a lot of trolls on my YouTube channel saying that it's rude that I say this. I wonder if they're government agents. But I tell all my guests that as much as I'd love to have you on again because you're a fascinating individual, I have made a mission on this show of trying to get as many different people on the show as possible before giving one specific guest double dips, because that's the fairest way to do it, I feel, and the best way to get different versions of information out. So I probably won't be contacting you again, but only because there's a lot of other fascinating individuals that I need to get on the show. But it was a pleasure, and I wish you good luck, Frater.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. I certainly understand. I, too, there's only a few people that I've actually turned back to because there's so many awesome and interesting people out there, and so I understand. No hard feelings. But,
all right.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Have a great day.
You too. Later. All right, Tom Montauk will be on next week. Don't have time to talk about it, but he's on next week. Tom Montauk. Namaste.